Hey guys, Chris here. Today I have a story about two young men from Pennsylvania who hiked down into the bottom of a very steep hollow along a river, and there they find something extremely frightening they did not expect. That's next. All right, I am just outside Grover Hot Springs State Park. It's that way in California, right near the Nevada border. And I'm along Markleyville Creek. It's pretty marshy down here. The creek's this way, and I got a small creek behind me right here. And it's interesting because it's similar kind of environment our story is going to take place in. Before we talk about that, I have my beer by Anderson Valley Brewing Company, and this is called Bunt Amber Ale, and it has a bear with deer antlers on it right there. I don't know if that's like a jackalope, barralope, I'm not sure what that is, but that's what I'm drinking today. So there we go. It's gonna be kind of sudsy. I had it in the creek right behind me there. I do that every time. That's why I have to be in the wilderness drinking my beer, because I am I'm kind of a mess. So that is good. Amber Ale. So our story takes place in 1985 in Pennsylvania. Two young men, Greg and Dylan, both 15 years old, lived south of Pittsburgh in a small community near the Monongahela River. And they loved to be in the outdoors. They loved to be in the forest, in the woods, hanging out with their friends. And both Dylan and Greg loved to go in the forest and be really quiet and observe wildlife. And they would go into these pretty remote places and quietly hike through and look for animals, tracks, listen for birds, scare up deer. And I can totally relate to this because I grew up in Minnesota, in Maple Grove, Minnesota, and we live near a place called Elm Creek Park Reserve. And Elm Creek Park Reserve is a county park, about 5 lakes in it, a couple of creeks running through it. Elm Creek was one of them. And we would go out here. Throughout the year, we would hike out there on the weekends, whenever we got a chance. We'd even snowshoe out there in the winter. And we would follow along the creek, and we would find deer tracks, and then we would go out in the field, and we would scare up deer. It was quite exciting to do that. And we would scare up pheasants, and other animals, ducks as well. It was fun. I can totally relate to these guys. And so on this particular day, June of 1985, Dylan and Greg went to the Monongahela River, not too far from their community where they lived. They followed this dirt road towards the river, and then they cut over through the forest about 400 feet. And along this hollow, they had some rope, and they attached it to a tree, and they lowered themselves into this hollow. And what a hollow is, it's usually a flat-bottomed, small valley, usually with trees in it and a small creek, and it's adjacent to a larger river, in this case, the Monongahela River. And so they lowered themselves into this hollow. And it was very dense, kind of like this. That's kind of why I'm here today. It's kind of like this, where there's a lot of water and brush, no trails. this is where the wildlife really hangs out because of the remoteness of it. People don't come down here. There's no trails, water. And they got to the bottom of this hollow, and they're hiking through, being really quiet. Brush is pretty thick. There's no trail. They come to this deadfall, a downed tree, about 100 feet long, 2.5 feet wide. The crown lifted it up about 3 or 4 feet. And so they went around the base of this tree where the roots were, and they saw some saplings that had grown up, some vines. And where the roots were, there was kind of a thicket of brush there, but they could clearly see a brown humped shape lying there, covered in hair, fur. They couldn't identify what it was. It was about 10 feet in front of them, and they both just stopped, and they knew that they were being really quiet, and they probably just came upon this thing. It was either sleeping, injured, dead. Dylan guessed it was probably a bear, but he couldn't really tell clearly if it was a bear or not. And so he motions to Greg, like, let's get out of here. And he thought, I'll go tell my dad. And his dad knows some people in the police department. Just let them know bears are pretty rare in that area, at least at that time. And as soon as they turned and walked a few feet, this thing that was laying in the brush slowly stood up like this, just. And now they could clearly see that it was on 2 feet. It was about 2 feet taller than them because they were both about 5.5 feet tall. And it was clearly 2 feet taller than them. It was muscled. It wasn't fat like a bear. And it had long sloping shoulders and these long arms hanging down. They couldn't see the face because the back was to them. And it was just standing there now. And they were just filled with fear. And they didn't want to run at this point. They didn't know what this thing was going to do. And this all happened in just a few seconds, just a matter of seconds. And it's standing there, and then it takes off running through the brush, like this, like behind me here. And it ran in this zigzag pattern, really loudly crashing through the brush. And Dylan said it seemed like it took it about 1 second to go 20 yards. That's what it felt like anyways. They saw it disappear in just a matter of seconds into the brush. They could still clearly hear it running through the brush. And they both turned and ran the opposite direction up the hollow. And they're running through the brush, and they could feel it hitting their face. They're jumping over logs. They're just working their way as fast as they can through the brush. And they can still hear it back there. It's not pursuing them, but they can still hear it, clearly hear it behind them. They ran as fast as they could to the rope, got to the rope. Greg went up first. Dylan went up second, and they just literally just hand over hand pulled themselves out of the hollow. Dylan's looking over his shoulder, and then he's listening to make sure that it's not coming. He said that was the most vulnerable time, was to slowly working his way out of this hollow. I think it was about 175, maybe 200 feet to get out of it. They get to the top, it's level, and then they go the 400 feet back to the dirt road, back to the main road, and then they got their bikes that were in the ditch there, and they bike back to town. They get home, and they're both just totally in shock by what they saw. And Dylan remembered that he had seen on TV bears in wildlife programs walking on 2 feet, and they're very awkward if you've seen bears walking on 2 feet. And at the zoo he saw bears, and he said this was nothing like a bear. It was very agile, it was very efficient and fast on 2 feet. And he said this was not a deer, it was not a bear, it was not a dog. it was most likely a Sasquatch. But they both felt they didn't really want to tell people specifically what they saw. So they told their friends they saw something down in the hollow. They couldn't identify it, but it was a large mammal, and they wanted to go back. So these three friends came back with them, and they went back to the forest, across the forest floor, to the rope, lowered themselves down, worked themselves back to this log, down tree, went around the base of it, and now they could clearly see where this thing had been laying. And the grass that was there was all matted down, and then there was a pile of leaves right there, like placed right there. And it almost looked like where some deer, a small herd of deer could camp, or 4 or 5 deer. But there were no deer prints, no deer tracks there. They did not find any footprints. They did, along the stream a little bit farther away, they saw some impressions that they thought might be some footprints. Couldn't really tell. The stream had kind of washed a lot of it away. They went back home, and Dylan and Greg still talked about it, but they always felt people probably wouldn't believe them, so they didn't want to go around telling everybody. And they knew they most likely saw a Sasquatch that day. Dylan lost touch with Greg over the years, and he said he'd really never told anybody about it since that day in June of 1985 along the Monongahela River. And that is our story for today. Pretty interesting. I have a lot more stories coming. I really appreciate you guys. And this is kind of a interesting little forest I'm in. I think well after dark, this place gets pretty loud. I saw turkeys when I came in here. I saw a lot of deer tracks along the creek. Heard a lot of birds. And I think this is kind of one of those wildlife corridors after dark. So probably pretty spooky after dark. So, all right. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys. Appreciate your comments as always. If you like stories about the strange, unexplained, and things that go bump in the night, please like and subscribe. You guys know what to do. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Keep hiking.